Let's talk about something really fascinating today. It's a story about maps, about power, and about identity. It's about how a name that the entire world recognized for more than 2,000 years, could just disappear, practically overnight. I mean, how does that even happen? You'd think it's impossible, right? One day, you look at a map and there it is, the ancient, storied empire of Persia. The next day, it's gone. But it didn't sink into the ocean and it wasn't conquered. No, something else happened, something much, much more deliberate. That's right, an order went out. In 1935, the government of that very nation demanded that the rest of the world stop calling it Persia. They insisted on being called by their own name, Iran. Now, this was way more than just changing a sign on a building. This was a calculated effort to completely rewrite a global identity. And to really get why, we need to rewind the clock by a few thousand years. So the whole key to this story is this long-standing dual identity. For literally centuries, the country had two names at the same time, the one used by the people who actually lived there, and a completely different one used by everybody else. Okay, let's break this down. Iran was what we call an endonym. That's the inside name, the one the people used for themselves. It means land of the Aryans. But the rest of the world, they knew the country by its exonym, Persia. And that name came from the ancient Greeks. They basically named the entire empire after the first province they ran into, which was Pars, or Persis. And that's the concept you gotta understand here. An exonym is just an outside name. You see it all the time. Think about Germany. The people who live there call it Deutschland. Or Japan, where the locals call it Nippon. Well, for 2,500 years, Persia was probably one of the most famous exonyms on the planet. Now, here's the thing. Iran wasn't some new name they just made up. Not at all. As you can see here, its roots go incredibly deep. We're talking ancient Zoroastrian texts calling it Aryan Vaja. The great Achaemenid kings, like Darius the Great, called themselves Arya or Aryan. And by the time of the Sasanian Empire, it was officially known as Iran Shah, the domain of the Iranians. So you see, the name had always been there, just evolving over millennia. So what changed? Why in 1935 did this internal name suddenly have to become the only name? Well, the answer really comes down to one man, Reza Shah Pahlavi. He rose to power in 1925, and he had this grand vision to drag his country out of the past and forge it into a powerful, centralized, modern nation. And believe me, he did not waste any time. This timeline just shows you how fast this all went down. In December of 1934, the official demand goes out to all the foreign embassies, an official reason is published, and by March 21st, 1935, which is Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, it was done. It was official. It was meant to be a symbolic rebirth of the nation. So what was really driving this? Well, this quote from Syed Nafisi, who was basically the intellectual force behind the change, it just says it all. For these modernizers, the name Persia was just full of baggage. It brought up all these romantic, Orientalist fantasies and memories of colonial weakness. They figured, to build a new future, they needed to shed that old skin and use their real name. The whole strategy really had three big goals. First, unity. Iran was seen as a more inclusive name that could cover all the different ethnic groups in the country, not just the ethnic Persians. But as we'll see, that idea had a pretty sharp edge to it. Second, they wanted to reclaim a very specific part of their history, to leapfrog over the more recent centuries and connect directly back to the pre-Islamic glory of the ancient empires. And finally, to project strength. It was a declaration to the world. We are a sovereign, modern nation, not your playground anymore. But you have to remember the timing. This is all happening in the 1930s, and ethno-nationalism is exploding across the globe. So the name Iran, land of the Aryans, carries some pretty heavy historical weight, which brings us to the most controversial part of this whole story, the possible influence of Nazi Germany. Now, one theory is that the whole idea was pushed by the Iranian diplomats in Berlin who were, surrounded by Nazi ideology. By playing up this shared Aryan heritage with the Germans, it was a strategic way to draw a line in the sand, to distinguish themselves from their Arab and Jewish neighbors, their Semitic neighbors, in a world that was becoming dangerously obsessed with race. On the other hand, most historians today argue that the motivation was mainly nationalist and just pragmatic. Reza Shah saw Germany as a third force, a powerful ally he could use to push back against British and Russian dominance in his country. From this point of view, using the name Iran was less about Nazi racial theory and way more about reclaiming a powerful, homegrown symbol of strength and national pride. So whatever the real reason was, the rest of the world was mostly just confused, and in some cases, pretty annoyed. Yeah, this whole name change did not go over smoothly at all. Get this. A memo that was dug up from the British Foreign Office literally called the demand silly. You have to remember, the British had huge interests in the region, and to them, Persia was an established brand. The change was just a hassle. It's a perfect snapshot of that fading colonial mindset crashing right into a new, rising nationalism. And then there was just the sheer practical chaos of it all. For so many people in the West, the new name Iran sounded way too similar to its neighbor, Iraq. And this wasn't just a minor annoyance. During World War II, it actually caused serious logistical problems and intelligence mistakes for the Allied forces operating there. All that confusion, plus the realization that they'd lost a ton of cultural history tied to the name Persia, eventually led to a kind of walkback. In 1959, the Shah's government put out a new decree saying, you know what? Both names are fine. You can use them interchangeably. The idea was to get back all that glorious history associated with Persia while still keeping Iran as the official political name. But trying to have it both ways, well, it couldn't really undo the complicated legacy that first decision created. And that choice, made way back in 1935, has left behind a really complex legacy that still shapes how people think about their identity today, especially for Iranians living all over the world. This table is a pretty good cheat sheet for how the words are used now. Iran, that's the political nation-state. Iranian is the nationality, and it's inclusive of everyone, whether they're ethnically Persian, Kurdish, Azeri, Baluch, you name it. Persia tends to be used now for cultural and historical things. Think Persian rugs, Persian cats, Persian poetry. And finally, Persian usually refers to the main ethnic group and the Farsi language they speak. And this brings us to a really critical point. Remember that goal of unification? Well, for many of the country's ethnic minorities, the government's push for a single Iranian identity, one that was centered on Persian history and the Persian language, it didn't feel unifying at all. For them, it was the start of a long process of forced assimilation, where their own unique cultures and languages were pushed to the margins. So, when you look at the whole story of Persia and Iran, it leaves you with this really deep question. A name can be a powerful link to an ancient past, absolutely, but it can also be a tool, a weapon even, to try and forge a brand new future. The real challenge is, whose future does that name represent? And what parts of the past get left behind?